provided to the borough's two official newspapers and also published on the borough's website. Carmela, will you call the roll, please?
Councilman Benjavanga?
Here.
Councilwoman Fostini?
Here.
Councilman Flesh?
Here.
Councilman Willett?
Here.
Council President White?
Here.
Mayor Nutt?
I'm here.
Councilman Dean is on vacation.
Can you take us through a review of tonight's agenda, please?
We have one executive session, one item for executive session. We have 6 ordinances to be read and 18 resolutions. And correspondence. And payment of the bills.
Okay, so we'll also have a presentation tonight for the Fair Share Housing Professionals. This is the borough's COA plan. This was advertised as a town hall style meeting, so we'll turn the meeting over shortly to Stan.
Mayor, we were looking to add one resolution to the agenda.
Okay.
It would be Resolution 17-325. And it really is just to establish some guidelines for and rules for the dog park. Because we don't have a dog park, although we have rules for the parks themselves, there's some, I guess, intricacies in the dog park itself in regards to all of our parks are required to have a dog on a leash. The dog park is made so that you don't have your dog on a leash. So there's a bunch of rules and regulations. I believe Councilwoman, I'll let Councilwoman Faustini discuss where I guess.
All the rules that are on this resolution are the rules that are in place in the Middlesex County dog parks presently. So we just kind of followed suit with what they did. There's 2 of them, and between the 2, I took all the rules pretty much to ensure the safest environment there.
Okay. Yeah, these seem pretty basic. Users must abide by the rules and regulations covering South Plainfield parks. Children under 8 are not permitted in the off-leash dog area. Children 8 and older must be supervised by an adult. Limit of 2 dogs per person. No time number of dogs with an off-leash area exceeds 20. Dogs with a history of dangerous or aggressive behavior prohibited. Puppies under 6 months old are prohibited. Dogs over 6 months old must be spayed or neutered. Dogs must be currently licensed and vaccinated, wear collars, displaying a license at all times. Dogs must be leashed prior to entering and upon exiting the off-leash area. Once in this area, users must restrain their dogs when entering and leaving. Dogs must be enjoyed as owners at all times. Users must clean up after the dogs from animals other than dogs being brought into the fenced area of the parks. If dogs are not permitted, no food of any kind is allowed, and any incidents must be reported to the recreation department. Can I get a motion to add resolution 17-325 to tonight's meeting?
So.
Motion by Councilman Benjavanga, seconded by Councilman Wola. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. Also, can I get a motion to add for executive session resolution 17-307 for personnel deputy clerk? So,
Second.
motion by Council President White, seconded by Councilman Benjavanga. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? We will have executive session tonight. Council comments on agenda items?
Okay.
You.
Okay. So, just wanted to, I need to separate resolution 318.
Okay.
The other thing is that last meeting I talked about the rail crossings on New Brunswick Avenue, basically all the rail crossings in South Plainfield and how they're in desperate need of repairing and the safety issues towards that. And this meeting was asking for a resolution, which is number 315, to send out to Conrail about the rail crossings and the roadways. But after the meeting last week, I would be remiss if I didn't say a big thank you to Tap Into for happened to South Plainfield for doing an article about it. Conrail's legal team did reach out to me and asked how they can be of assistance. They said that they will do anything that they can to help alleviate the problem. So it's not set in stone, but we are scheduled to meet sometime this week over at the crossings. So I would ask, I told him that since he gave me his commitment to fixing the railroads quick and committed to a meeting that quickly, that I would ask that this resolution be removed from the agenda because of that. So a big thank you to Conrail for reaching out so quickly to us.
Okay. Can we get a motion to table resolution 17-350?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Council President White, seconded by Councilman Santiago. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, we will strike resolution 17-315 from tonight's meeting. Okay. At this point, we are going to, any other council comments, questions, concerns?
Nothing from me, Mayor.
Okay. At this point, we will turn it over to Stan. He is our borough planner, and he's going to have a presentation on the fair share housing code settlement, part of which, or what a major portion of tonight's meeting will entail. I believe there's four ordinances that are on for at least introduction tonight. Stan will tell you more about that. So, Stan, it's all you.
Thank you. I believe, Mr. Rizzo, do you want to
Just-
lead in with a couple of quick things?
Just as a lead-in, and I think this is getting probably a little repetitive at this point, but, we are at the point, we have an agreement that's been approved by the court. We're now obligated to move forward and enact ordinances in accordance with the agreement. There will be a court proceeding in September, which is called a compliance hearing, where the court will evaluate whether we've moved forward as we're obligated to do so. And it has been said a number of times, and some of this is my personal opinion, it's part of a legal opinion, but this affordable housing is something that was foisted on the towns by judicial edict, not by any legislation, going back 40 years. The legislature has never seen fit to do anything to help the towns, to address this or deal with this. We reached a point where the governor's solution, so to speak, was to essentially ignore the courts in terms of what they wanted done. And as a result, the courts took back the enforcement of affordable housing obligations on all the towns, and all the towns are faced with this. To this point, approximately 120 towns have settled. It has permitted, through these settlements, about 36,000 affordable units. Bearing in mind that's a 20% set aside, that means that's 180,000 residences throughout the state that are being permitted to be built. Now, they won't all be built, but permitted to be built. To give you all an idea, I think every town but South Brunswick has settled or are in discussions at this point. South Brunswick's the only town that refused to settle and litigated. They had a large burden, I'll put it, placed on them by the court. They are in the process of appealing, but they've kind of lost the first round already. And to give you an idea, Old Bridge settled with an agreement to allow almost 1,400 affordable units, 1,396. East Brunswick settled allowing 1,067. Piscataway settled for 975. Our agreement is for 880. Puts us in a little better position, but look, none of these are what we want. None of these are optimal, but you're trying to make the best of a bad situation. South Brunswick, by contrast, refused to settle, and the court imposed on them an obligation to allow 3,000 affordable units. which again, when you consider that's 20%, that's 15,000 new residences that could be built in South Brunswick if they lose their appeals. So I think we've done a good job of making the best of a very bad situation. Nobody wants this, that I can tell. Fair Share Housing Organization is really just an organization funded by builders and developers that obviously have a vested interest in this. And we at least we were able to come to an agreement where there'll be two primary developments, and we were afforded through our agreement an ability to participate, I'm not going to say control, but contribute greatly into the design, because if, like South Brunswick, they also have no say in how they built, what's built, etc. We were able to have at least considerable stay in this. So we're at this point now where we need to enact these ordinances that are going to allow the construction as we agreed to do. And once these ordinances are introduced and then passed, it'll be presented to the court, and I imagine in short order the court will kind of stamp an approval on it, and we'll proceed from that point. And I'm going to leave Stan to give the really more broad strokes, really that's detail, but as to exactly what we're doing in terms of these ordinances.
So Stan, I don't know where you're starting, but I think for the benefit of anybody watching at home, it probably makes sense to start with the initial plan is not what this plan looked like. The initial plan was primarily the overlay plan. So just as you talk about the final plan, kind of educate everybody how we got there.
Sure, and there's a few points that I want to emphasize up front. And I'm not going to get into a substantial amount of detail in terms of the generation of the numbers and generation of the obligation that Mr. Rizzo spelled out. And we've done that in quite significant detail in a number of other meetings and forums. But if there's any specific questions that either the members of the council might have or the members of the public might have, I certainly can address that. The one thing that I do want to emphasize right up to that is that the borough has been engaged in the preparation of housing plans and providing opportunities for affordable housing over the course of the last couple of decades. And in fact, the borough is one of the few towns that actually received approval from their third round affordable housing plan from the Council on Affordable Housing before all the litigation took place, and then ultimately the courts took over the process of approving plans and identifying obligations for municipalities. So the borough has had a consistent and a continuing engagement and involvement in the affordable housing planning process. And in fact, I think the key thing for the council and for the members of the public to understand is that, in fact, that fundamentally the plan that I'll be describing to you, kind of a broad brush overstroke, is essentially the plan that's been in place for the last 10 years or so within the borough. There's really only, essentially only one new major site, affordable housing site for inclusionary development that's been added because the borough was in fact obligated to add that site in based on the determination of the court master. And the other major ordinance that, zoning ordinance that Paul noted was in fact to further refine and to control the development on the Harris Steel site, which is a site that exists in your plans and that was part of your previously approved plan. So fundamentally, after all the negotiations and discussions and the review of the numbers for the borough and review of the obligations that the borough had, really there was only a couple of major changes that were made, and that was the inclusion of the Motorola site, which I'll be describing in just a moment, at 1111 Durham Avenue. And as you mentioned, Mayor, the overlays, the zoning overlays that we had recommended be put in place on the downtown and in the northwestern part of the borough in the OBC1 district, because the borough has limited, and this is really the third point that I wanted to make, the borough has very, very limited available, developable vacant land within the borough. And in fact, the obligation that's been established by the courts and approved by the court master, in fact, recognizes the limited capacity of the borough to be able to bring on new development within the borough. Certainly this kind of scale of development that Mr. Rizzo is talking about in some of the other communities that had settlements that resulted in significantly greater numbers. So in terms of the approach and focus of the borough's plan, fundamentally there was really not a major significant change. Where we needed to make those changes, what we, as part of the settlement and negotiation process, made sure that in fact the borough maintained a significant amount of control on the ultimate development that takes place in those areas, and I'll get into that in a moment. I think that was the key and probably the most critical outcome from the borough's perspective, with the understanding that we had to do something, with the understanding that we had this obligation that was established by the courts, with the understanding that the court master required us to include the Motorola site because of the processes that were involved in being a vacant land adjustment community. But despite of all of that, I think we've been able to create a good plan, a plan that provides the level of control and protection for the borough residents. And I think moving forward, and one of the important things for the borough residents to understand is that this plan, if ultimately approved by the court, essentially carries us through the year 2025. So for the next 8 years, the borough would be protected against any inclusionary or exclusionary lawsuit. And it's essentially, as long as we continue to implement the plan, we would have court protection from any major further changes to the borough's land use plan. So, and I'll try to speak up, and if anybody in the public has a hard time hearing. You've seen this, and actually it's important also to note that the housing element and fair share plan, which is essentially the part of the borough's master plan, the element or the component of the borough's master plan that actually describes the borough's plan, was approved by the borough's planning board. That plan, as part of the public notice process, was put on file, and members of the public had an opportunity to review that plan prior to the public hearing that the planning board had on the plan. In addition, as noted before, there's been various meetings, both at the council level and at the planning board level, where the plan and the proposed implementation of the plan has been discussed. So I'll describe the major pieces of the plan, and then we'll talk a little bit, and I'll conclude with talking a little bit about the ordinances which are being considered by the council that essentially implement the key components of the borough's plan. So the various affordable housing sites are located in a variety of different locations within the borough. And as I noted, most of the housing sites that are identified on this map, which is also included in the borough's housing element and fair share plan, and I'm not sure, I believe that's on file or available through the borough's website as well. But copies are available at the clerk's office if anybody is interested in taking a longer look at this plan. But essentially, if you look at the plan, these sites that are identified in sort of a pale red color throughout the borough are, for the most part, existing sites that either have been constructed or zoned for affordable housing. The new site that I mentioned before is site number 9, just to the south of 287 on Durham Avenue, which we either call the Motorola site or 1111 Durham Avenue. And at that site, there is going to be a multifamily residential development. Again, I'll get into that into a little bit more detail, of 410 units, of which 82 of those units are going to be designated and dedicated for low or moderate income households. And in addition to those 82 units, the borough is also going to be getting rental bonus credits, essentially a 2-for-1 rental bonus that is credited towards the borough's affordable housing obligation. And as part of that approval, as part of that inclusion in the plan, the borough would be adopting a zoning ordinance that specifically controls the the development within that site. And we've included things like buffer areas, providing substantial buffer to Durham Avenue to protect residential neighborhoods that are across Durham Avenue, a progression in density going from lower density townhome development to stacked townhomes in the middle of the development, which was somewhat denser, and then multi-story multifamily development immediately adjacent to 287. The other site that has not yet developed yet, but has been part of the plan, and which the borough is considering as specific ordinance controlling the development, is called the commonly known as the Harris Steel site at the intersection of Tyler and New Brunswick. And that site is proposed for 750 residential units, which again, that site and those numbers, the order of magnitude and that site has been part of the borough's plan for a number of years. What the borough is doing is through the negotiation and discussion with the potential developer of that site, again, an ordinance has been crafted which controls the design and development and the development details of that site, including, again, buffer areas, ensuring that the development is well designed from an architectural and building design perspective, that the roadways are designed in a manner that provides good circulation, based on lessons learned that the borough has done in the past. And all those same types of site details are also identified for the Motorola site as well. So that's the benefit of having that negotiation and having that control of those sites. And I can get into detail. I have some further information about the details of that, but I'd like to give the overview of the plan first. The other new component that I mentioned are two overlay districts, which are, one of them covers the downtown and some commercial zones immediately adjacent to the downtown. And then there is the one up in the further northwestern corner of the borough, which corresponds to the OBC 1 district in that area. And what these two overlay districts are designed to do, and as I mentioned before, the borough is a vacant land adjustment community, which means that we have very limited land. So as part of the creating opportunities for development, new development or redevelopment that might contain affordable housing, that a mechanism to do that is these overlay zones. And overlay zones provide certain incentives for new mixed-use development. Mixed use means retail or office uses on the first floor and residential uses on the second or third floor. And essentially, if that type of development is constructed, there'd be a commensurate obligation to provide for what's called an affordable housing set-aside, which means that a certain percentage of those units that are constructed in those buildings would have to be set aside for affordable housing, which would include, if it's a rental project, 15% of the units would be required to be affordable. And if it's a for sale project, 20% of the units would be required to be affordable. Now, what's important to note, in an overlay district, you're not mandating affordable housing in those areas. The underlying zoning, if it's a commercial zone, that underlying zoning still remains in place, and that's available to the property owners in those districts. However, they do have the option, if they want, if they want to do so, is to develop that mixed-use development with an affordable housing component to it. So you're not mandating it, you're creating an option, you're creating an opportunity, and that's a mechanism that has been recognized by the courts and COA as a way to address affordable housing obligations in communities that have a limited vacant developable land. The benefit...
Stan, if I may, just
Yes,
real quick. So then, just so everyone's clear, that 15 or 20% set aside, that would go towards our 2025 obligation.
That is correct.
So we'd have a jump start on that obligation by having these units built if there's mixed use in those areas.
Exactly right. Essentially, the borough's plan, as it's constructed, fully addresses the borough's obligations established by the courts for affordable housing. So we don't have to do anything further other than what's presented in the plan for the immediate obligation. But you're correct, that because we have limited vacant land, we have to provide these opportunities. And if in fact units are provided, again, it gets credited above and beyond what we're providing in the remainder of the plan.
So Stan, like I had mentioned earlier, so initially in dealings with the court master, the initial plan primarily included the Harris Steel property, which was put in the plan, I believe, in 2007. 2009, the council, or 2008, I think in the fall of 2008, the fall of 2009, the council stopped short of passing a developer's agreement or any kind of ordinances on that property. With the election of Governor Christie, the thought was that it was going to be co was going to be dismantled, and so that wasn't going to be necessary. So as you said, that was in the plan already. So including that for this new round going to 2025 would have been finalizing the ability to develop that property, but then only including the overlay zones. It wasn't until the owner of 1111 Durham stepped in and intervened on the plan, which was supported by the court master, and said that that property at 1111 Durham couldn't be, or was in need of, I don't know what they're saying. It was considered vacant. It was suitable for housing, even though we clearly disagree with that. And we disagree with it for a number of reasons, because number one, we've had major corporations look at that property and they were seeking to rent that out, and only where they found other opportunities they didn't rent there. Even with that, there were still smaller developments, proposed developments, commercial developments that were proposed at that property, but not entertained by the owner. So I just want to make it clear that the initial plan to resolve the latest round of code, going to 2025, only included those overlay zones, which were potential development zones, and in line with what the governing body, and I think what the borough was looking to do over a number of years, which is to make the downtown a more walkable and more true downtown. So those two things kind of coincided, and it wasn't until Mr. Moore stepped in and offered his property, the quartermaster agreed that that should be included, that we were then forced by the courts to consider that. We went over why it made no sense to try and fight that, because the courtmaster had already deemed that that property was going to be included in the plan. We could fight over one thing, and that was going to be the number of units that were going to go, but it wasn't going to be that that property was going to be excluded. So either way, we were looking at development at 1111 Durham, development over at the Harris Steel property, which was in a prior administration included in the plan, and then the potential development, which is, I think, in line with what most people up here were looking to do, was to renovate the downtown, rejuvenate the downtown, and include some mixed-use development there.
And that's the exact point that I was going to make, is in fact that the borough's plan is aligned very, very closely with your overall strategy for the downtown and your overall land use planning strategy. You're not fundamentally altering, maybe with the exception of, as you mentioned, of the 1111 Durham, you're not fundamentally altering the zone plan of the community. And to the extent that, and when you compare that to, as Paul was indicating previously, to other municipalities, I think it's a substantial win for the borough. I think we all would agree that we would have had, if we were just looking at it as a straight land use planning issue for 1111 Durham, I think we would have preferred a different outcome where that site would have been consistent with the zoning in that area, which is corporate office zoning, light industrial zoning, and that it would have, for development as a corporate office center or light industrial would have furthered the borough's tax base. And we argued pretty strongly, and I think having gone through with the borough those sessions, I think you guys had done as best as you could to get the number down, and I think most significantly, as I mentioned before, getting the controls on that development, and that transition in density, the buffer, the standards for the design of the development, the inclusion of open space elements. When it comes down to ultimately what that might look like internally, I think we've done the best we possibly could in creating or mandating, I should say, a well-designed project. So, and I think the planning board will continue to have an active role, because even once you adopt these zoning ordinances, all these developments that I mentioned, the Harris site and the Motorola site development specifically, or any development that comes before the planning board under the overlay provisions, will have a site plan review, and site-specific issues would be addressed at that process. So I think probably I'd like to leave it there and answer any questions that the council members may have, or the members of the general public, and I certainly can get into more detail about the plan if it was, or the ordinances, if you have any
Well,
specific
I
questions.
know you might have briefly spoke on it, but just because you had mentioned, so what the governing body has in front of them today is those introductions, those 4 ordinances. So can you just go over very high level what those ordinances are going to be?
Right. The first of the ordinances is what's called the Affordable Housing Ordinance. And essentially what that does, it replaces some of the existing provisions in your ordinance, and it addresses the administrative mechanisms and the controls on the development of any affordable units that might be developed within the new sites, and certainly controls any of the requirements within the existing affordable housing developments as part of the projects and developments that you had previously approved. So it's primarily administrative in nature. There are some aspects to that are included in that ordinance, including your existing development fee ordinance, and for the general public's edification, that's an ordinance in which, that's been on the books for a number of years, in which development fees are collected from developments that are not inclusionary, do not include affordable housing. That goes into a housing trust fund, and those monies in the trust fund are used to support the borough's the borough's affordable housing plan, including administrative costs as well as other costs, including the funding of your existing rehabilitation program, which is a program to rehabilitate existing units that are currently occupied by low and moderate income households that may be below code, that need some financial assistance to actually bring them up to code. And that's been an ongoing program that you've had for a number of years, and you will continue to implement that plan as part of that program as part of the plan. So first one is primarily administrative in nature. The second of the two ordinances is the ordinance that I just mentioned with respect to the overlay zones. It creates the overlay districts that are identified in blue on that map. Again, that's an overlay over the existing zoning, and creates that option that Mary you were talking about. Then we have the ordinance that that controls the development at the Motorola site, commonly known as Motorola site, or 1111 Durham. And that includes all the various details that were negotiated as part of your settlement agreement with the developer of the Motorola site. And it specifically, that ordinance specifically references the provisions of the settlement agreement, so it locks in those key things that the borough negotiated in terms of development standards and the design of the development. And that is, like any zoning ordinance, covers all the requirements of that development, what needs to be developed. And then at the final ordinance is the ordinance that governs the Harris Steel site. Essentially, it replaces the existing multifamily residential development district that controls the development of the Harris Steel site now. But now, based on the negotiations with the developer, there is much more specific standards in terms of access, the design of the development, the provisions of open space wetland areas, walking paths within the development, the design of buildings, the designs of streets and open space elements, similar to what we did with the Motorola site as well. So there's much more detail in terms of the controls of that. And then just going back to the overlay ordinance for a moment, in that overlay ordinance, it does specify the specific incentives that are provided in each of the districts for the creation of the new mixed-use development. And again, to emphasize the mayor's point, that is also goes hand in glove with the efforts to revitalize the borough's downtown. So those are essentially, in a nutshell, the four ordinances that you're considering.
So a couple more points. It's been mentioned before, I guess, in public meetings, social media, probably letters to the editor and alike. Why didn't the borough just look at 100% senior housing facilities and build that instead?
Well, that goes to the very the esoteric aspects of the regulation. And
in a nutshell, we're restricted by the percentage of
That's right.
units that can.
There are caps that are provided, and the courts are basically, even though they threw out the COA regulations of the Council on Affordable Housing, there's still aspects of the COA's regulations that it still uses as a standard and guide for the creation of affordable housing plans. And all the court-appointed planning masters follow those guidelines as well. And that includes caps on the number of senior units that can be credited towards an obligation. In fact, actually, the borough has an existing senior development, the borough's South Plainfield Senior Residences, which provides credits and has been part of the borough's affordable housing plan since really the first round of the borough's plan. And so we have very limited ability to maybe a handful of units at most that could be created, as senior units moving forward. And then we also have, and conversely, have the ability and have taken and maximized the opportunity to take advantage of bonus credits through the rental bonus credits I mentioned. We went right up to the maximum, which is 25% of the obligation for new construction to take credit, which actually reduces down the number of actual units that need to be created through these rental bonus credits. So what we tried to do, as best as we possibly could, is maximize the benefit to the borough and take advantage of every opportunity. Unfortunately, with the senior units, we do face that cap, and we'll continue to face that cap moving forward.
So there's a cap on seniors, there's a cap on the rental bonus credits that you can get rental units as well. What about selling our requirement to some other community?
Well, actually, in the first round, as part of the borough's original plan, you did have what's called a regional contribution agreement, and you actually had units. In fact, the Traditions Development, which is not identified on the plan, but it's really sort of de facto part of your original plan, made a contribution, monetary contribution to the borough, and the borough used that to transfer a portion of its obligation as part of its first round or prior round obligation to the city of New Brunswick. And that's still recognized, that regional contribution. If you take a look at the borough's fair share plan, it's identified in the plan, and you get 57 units of credit for that. However, the law was changed in the late 2000s, and in fact, a regional contribution agreement is no longer an available option, based on the statute. Otherwise, the borough would have taken advantage of that opportunity to get a payment in lieu of construction, as we did for the Traditions, and taken advantage of the opportunity to do an RCA.
So we've taken advantage of the senior housing, we've taken advantage of any kind of requirement, or any kind of bonus rental credits we can get. We tried the vacant land adjustment, that would have had just an overlay zone, and you can no longer sell your requirement to another community. Is there anything else that the borough looked at or didn't look at, or was available that could have reduced the impact
Well, I mean, as I said, we argued pretty vociferously about, not including the Harris Steel site, but at the Motorola site. But as we as I had indicated, that the court-appointed planning master made it very clear to us that that was not a possibility. So given that fact, what we did was, as I said, negotiate as best as we could to minimize the impact on the borough, both in terms of the number of units and the design of that project.
And so once you have an agreement in principle with the court master, and in this instance, the initial agreement, we were looking at a vacant land adjustment, someone came forward. The second agreement, which is what we essentially have here, so once we had that agreement, does that then lessen the impact of another potential development coming in and trying to make that same case?
Yes, in fact, as I mentioned, our plan, if approved by the court, in fact, would carry us through 2025. And as Councilwoman White had mentioned, we also, if we create units through the overlays, that in fact may carry further credits on beyond 2025. We'll wait and see what transpires with that. But essentially, we're protected from any new exclusionary, it's called an exclusionary lawsuit. In other words, a developer suing the town to try to get higher density in exchange of providing affordable housing. So this protects us pretty substantially from for any of those kinds of exclusionary lawsuits.
That's all I have for this witness. Anyone?
I just had one point I'd like for you to make, Sam. When we were crafting some of these ordinances, when the committee met, there was one piece in there about the minor site plan changes and we said that was non-negotiable. And then we talked about design and how we had some control over that, but I think that was a big piece that we had control over as well, that we were able to really maintain the continuity of these ordinances because of the negotiations that were done previously. So if you could just speak to that, at least that one piece that was in there.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point because we did have the overall general framework that was specified in the negotiated settlement agreements, but then the borough had to craft the actual ordinances that governed that. And so there was some further give and take between the borough, ourselves as the borough's planners, and the professionals representing the developers. And as most developers would do, they try to push the envelope a bit. Although, I think, I think having crafted a very detailed settlement agreement really helped us in that regard. That the developers knew that there couldn't be too much pushback, but they tried to push the envelope. And one of the questions was, could we potentially have something in the ordinance which would allow for a minor modification or a change or adjustment, based on when we go before the planning board, in case we run into certain circumstances, undefined circumstances. And I think the committee that was working on the ordinance was very clear that was not going to be a negotiable possibility. That we struck out the provision calling for the opportunity for minor revisions. So it's pretty much locked in place of how this design of the development is going to take place. Now there may be little tweaks here or there when we go before the board, but the fundamental issues that were a concern to the council and certainly concern to the borough in terms of the design, such as how you make the transition of density away from the existing residential neighborhoods, the buffers, the designs of the roadways, all those things were so fundamental. The open space elements that were so fundamental in the negotiation, they're locked in now in the ordinances, and the developer really has a very specific pathway to get approval, and that's the pathway that is consistent with the negotiated agreement.
Thank you.
Any other council comments, questions?
I just wanted to mention something that I hear from the general public. It may not be a question for you, Stan or Paul, but I'll say what I hear. And the bottom line is, who's going to pay for the additional schooling, police, and fire? How's that going to be taken care of?
Well, I mean, any new development, even if it's inclusionary, they have to pay property taxes. So it's not that the borough's not making any contributions to to developers, such as payments with taxation or any other financial incentives, and they're not excluded from property taxes. Those are, it's not like a low-income tax credit project or other projects where the borough is being required to participate in some way, in support of the project. And alternatively, it's not a nonprofit. It's not like any organization that would be tax exempt. These would run the full freight of the taxes, but there will be costs to the borough, as you can anticipate with your new residential
What
development.
I was going to say is the courts have to address that anyway. This is being pushed upon towns, and there's nothing really being said other than what you're saying is the taxes. Additional tax you pay for it.
That's right, and I really want to point out, as far as changes, fundamental changes to your plan. I mean, again, we did propose moving forward just the overlays, but all the other pieces of the plan, other than the overlays and the Motorola site, were all in your plan already and all accounted for in your long-range planning actions. So, unlike other municipalities, you did not have a fundamental alteration of your community zone plan.
And
So,
Stan, I think there's a couple points. So it should be mentioned again that the Harris Steel property was in the plan, and that's been in the plan for quite some time. So I know the Board of Education, and even under prior superintendents, has had a redistricting plan looking at that. And if you further look at the number of students coming out of traditions, I forget the exact number, but we had looked at that number, and I think it's one of the arguing points that clearly the developers are making, and I think this pretty much holds true, is that you're going to get a significantly reduced number of students coming out of condo townhome developments than you are any other way. So to Joe's concern, if 1111 Durham turned into 400 or 500 single-family homes or something like that, I think your impact is much greater. When you look at 3 or 4 bedroom homes, the potential for the school system is certainly greater. Doesn't mean that there won't be an impact, but I think based on what we're seeing coming out of traditions, this is the only way you're going to minimize that. When you're looking at essentially 2-bedroom condos, it doesn't give you a lot of room for family growing. So there's going to be some students come out. There's no doubt about that. And we have concerns with obviously patrolling, fire, and all that stuff. But again, unfortunately, because as Stan had mentioned, the legislature didn't take into account anything. This has been gone through the court systems. The courts haven't really weighed in on that. And I don't think they honestly care. Fair Share Housing doesn't honestly care. But it is something that I think the school board is aware of, the superintendents are aware of. They do have a plan. I'm sure that plan is going to be tweaked. Just as it's done over the years. I mean, if anybody who's lived in the town for a number of years, and I've been here 45 years, knows that the schools today aren't what they were, right? So there's obviously new schools that were built over time. The intermediate schools have either increased or shrunk with the number of grades that go to individual schools. So those things that the school system will look at, there's still some time before that's going to be built. I don't think you're going to see all these units built over the next 12 months or so. Any other concerns, comments, questions for Stan?
I think that's the flaw in the process is they're trying to get to an end number and they don't care how they get there. And unfortunately, municipalities have to deal with it. But I think as Mayor Nash stated, there are other plans in place. There are things that have been looked at. And, so this is where we are today.
Yeah, and it is, I agree with you, Councilman. It's the courts and the legislature beforehand didn't include in the evaluation the evaluation of those kinds of impacts in terms of establishing obligations. No municipality has been effectively able to prevent their obligation from being established by saying, well, there's going to be fiscal impacts on the community.
On schools, traffic, or any of those things.
Unfortunately, that wasn't part of the discussion.
At this point, Stan stated we will open it up for any comments from the public regarding today's presentation. Yes?
Can we go up there?
Yeah.
Debbie Boyle, Mansfield. I was going to ask if you had any knowledgeable estimation of the amount of students that would come in from all those areas. because we did a redistricting plan 4 years ago, and the county gave us a figure of coming out of celebrations of about 30 students. So, again, that's condos or
Correct.
townhomes. Do you have any kind of an estimation?
No, we did not do any estimate, any estimates of any of the school children coming from Harris or from the rural site.
Okay, because that's a consideration of having to possibly build a new school or expand the ones that are there.
Yeah, I think the key here is, as was mentioned, it wasn't something that we were going to be able to prevent the development for. So I don't think the planners have done anything, but again, if you take a look at what's coming out of tradition, I think we can extrapolate by the number of condo units over there and the number of townhomes. You can probably get a pretty good estimation. Traditions has been there, I think, what, 2001? So 16 years. So you got 16 years worth of data on a very similar project. You know, we'll say these projects hopefully be built better. We're going to take a lot of what you've seen in these ordinances kind of addresses some of like the shortcomings that were there. But again, a study on the number of students wouldn't have been able to, you know, derail any units because it wasn't a factor that the courtmaster or anybody was looking to weigh.
We do actually, we do school enrollment projections for a number of school districts throughout the state of New Jersey. And your general observation in terms of the number of school children generated by the type of residential unit is correct. That these types of units will tend to generate less on a per unit basis than an individual single family residential unit. But there will be school children generated by
And again, we could not
That wasn't a
deal with
criteria.
affordable housing. I mean, that was not something that they were giving us any money for.
That wasn't a criteria, that wasn't a limit.
South Portsmouth is gonna have 15,000 units. Can you imagine? Because they didn't want to deal, I mean, they have, but they didn't want to deal with the courts like we did, so they're gonna be even harder. Other than the taxes coming in.
Anything else from the public? Seeing none? Close the public portion. At this point, we'll ask for a motion to adjourn tonight's agenda meeting. So, adjourn. Thank you, Stan. Seeing no reason to delay, we'll go right to the public meeting. And this meeting has been advertised in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act, NJSA 10:4-6, with adequate notice of this meeting also being provided to the borough's 2 official newspapers and also published on the borough's website. Ms. Suter, will you call the roll, please?
Councilman Bonifay?
Here.
Councilwoman Fostini?
Here.
Councilman Besh?
Here.
Councilman Bullock?
Here.
Council President White?
Here. Thank you. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance and the invocation by Councilman Best.
Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Lord, I ask that you give this council the wisdom and guidance to govern over this borough, to keep all of our police, fire, EMTs, and military personnel out of harm's way. Amen.
At this point, we'll open it up once again for public comments on agenda items only. Seeing none, close the public portion. Can I get a motion to approve the council minutes of July 31st, agenda public and executive?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Council President White, seconded by Councilman Benjavanga. Carmella, can you call the roll?
Councilman Benjavanga?
Yes.
Councilwoman Fostini?
Yes.
Councilman Besh?
Yes.
Councilman Bullock?
Yes.
Council President White?
Yes.
Thank you. For final adoption, ordinance 2084. She usually reads it.
I am. An ordinance amending ordinance 2077 that provides for the compensation of employees of the borough of South Plainfield and the method of payment of such compensation for the years 2015 through 2018 for non-union professionals and governing bodies to adjust the social services director's salary range and add a title deputy clerk.
Thank you, Ms. Suter. I knew you were going to read it. All right. Can I get a motion for final adoption on ordinance 2084?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Council President White, seconded by Councilman Benjavanga. As this is for final adoption, we'll open up for public comments on ordinance 2084. None. Close the public portion. Council comments regarding ordinance 2084? Seeing none. Carmel, can you call the roll?
Councilman Benjavanga?
Yes.
Councilwoman Fostini?
Yes.
Councilman Besh?
Yes.
Councilman Wallach?
Yes.
Council President White?
Yes.
Thank you. For introduction, ordinance 2085.
An ordinance of the Borough of South Plainfield, County of Middlesex, State of New Jersey, amending and supplementing Chapter 504 of the Borough Code entitled Affordable Housing to address the requirements of the New Jersey Fair Housing Act and the New Jersey Uniform Housing Affordability Controls as they pertain to compliance with municipal affordable housing obligations.
Thank you. Can I get a motion for introduction on ordinance 2085?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Council President White, seconded by Councilman Faustini. Carmela, can you call the roll?
Councilman Benjavanga?
Just to make a statement that for the next four ordinances, 2085, 6, 7, and 8, I'm going to recuse myself for reasons stated in the past, for potential conflict with the affordable housing plan that was put in place 20-something years ago, had a zone that included a piece of property that my father owns in the downtown area, which is currently it's built. The other ones have property that is directly adjacent to my father for the 1111 Durham, so I would be in conflict. With that, I recuse myself.
Councilwoman Fostini?
Yes.
Councilman Besh?
Yes.
Councilman Wallach?
Yes.
Council President White?
Yes.
Thank you. Also for introduction, ordinance 2086.
An ordinance of the Borough of South Plainfield, County of Middlesex, and State of New Jersey, amending and supplementing Article 7 entitled Zone District Regulations of the Borough of South Plainfield zoning ordinance, establishing the requirements for an affordable housing overlay zone district in accordance with the adopted housing plan element and fair share plan of the Borough of South Plainfield.
Thank you. Can I get a motion for introduction on ordinance 2086?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Council President White, seconded by Councilman Wallach. Carmela, can you call the roll?
Councilman Benjavanga?
Recuse.
Councilwoman Fostini?
Yes.
Councilman Besh?
Yes.
Councilman Wallach?
Yes.
Council President White?
Yes.
Thank you. Also for introduction, ordinance 2087.
An ordinance of the Borough of South Plainfield, County of Middlesex, and State of New Jersey, amending and supplementing Chapter 540 entitled Zoning of the Code of the Borough of South Plainfield.
Thank you. Can I get a motion for introduction on ordinance 2087?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Councilman Faustini, seconded by Councilman Wallach. Carmela, can you call the roll?
Councilman Benjavanga?
Recuse.
Councilwoman Fostini?
Yes.
Councilman Besh?
Yes.
Councilman Wallach?
Yes.
Council President White?
Yes.
Thank you. And also for introduction, ordinance 2088.
An ordinance of the Borough of South Plainfield, County of Middlesex, and State of New Jersey, amending and supplementing Section 540-51 entitled Mud Mixed Use Development of the Code of the Borough of South Plainfield.
Doesn't sound right, but mixed-use development. Can I get a motion for introduction on ordinance 2088?
So moved, Mayor.
Motion by Council President White,
Second.
seconded by Councilman Wallach. Carmela, can you call the roll?
Councilman Benjavanga?
Recuse.
Councilwoman Fostini?
Yes.
Councilman Besh?
Yes.
Councilman Wallach?
Yes.
Council President White?
Yes.
Can I get a motion for introduction on ordinance 2089?
So moved.
Second.
I'm sorry. Also for introduction on ordinance 2089. But we do have a motion by Council President White, seconded by Councilman Benjamin. Yes, if you could.
An ordinance of the Borough of South Plainfield, County of Middlesex, and State of New Jersey, amending and supplementing Chapter 373 entitled Smoking of the Code of the Borough of South Plainfield.
Thank you. We have a motion by Council President White, seconded by Councilman Benjamin. Carmela, can you call the roll?
Councilman Benjavanga?
Yes.
Councilwoman Fostini?
Yes.
Councilman Besh?
Yes.
Councilman Wallach?
Yes.
Council President White?
Yes.
Okay, just a note that the public hearing for those ordinances will occur on September 5th meeting at approximately 7 p.m. Also, there'll be during that meeting, we'll be endorsing the Borough of South Plainfield County of Middlesex State of New Jersey Housing Element and Fair Share Plan. The public hearing for that resolution will be on September 5th as well, at approximately 7 p.m. Can I get a motion for Resolution 17-318?
So,
Second?
Motion by Council President White, seconded by Councilman Faustini. Carmella, can you call the roll on Resolution 17-318?
Councilman Benjavanga?
Recuse.
Councilwoman Faustini?
Yes.
Councilman Dash?
Yes.
Councilman Walner?
Yes.
Council President White?
yes.
Thank you. Can I get a motion for Resolution 17-308 to 17-317? Reminder, 17-315 was removed at the agenda meeting. 17-319 to 325. 325, which was added. That includes the authorization of the rules and guidelines for the off-leash dog park. Can I get a motion?
So moved, Mayor.
Second?
Motion by Council President White, seconded by Councilman Rolak. Carmella, can you call the roll?
Councilman Benjavanga?
Yes.
Councilwoman Faustini?
Yes.
Councilman Dash?
Yes.
Councilman Walner?
Yes.
Council President White?
Yes.
Thank you. We have 3 items of correspondence: Planning Board minutes, July 11th and 27th, Environmental Commission minutes from June 14th, and the Environmental Monthly Report for July. Can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Councilman Benjavanga, seconded by Council President White. Carmella, can you call the roll?
Councilman Benjavanga?
Yes.
Councilwoman Faustini?
Yes.
Councilman Dash?
Yes.
Councilman Walner?
Yes.
Council President White?
Yes.
Can I get a motion on payment of bills of $632,043.44?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Council President White, seconded by Councilman Rolak. Carmella, can you call the roll?
Councilman Benjavanga?
Yes.
Councilwoman Faustini?
Yes.
Councilman Dash?
Yes.
Councilman Walner?
Yes.
Council President White?
Yes.
Stan, anything else for us tonight?
He's texting.
Stan, anything else for us tonight?
Not for me, no.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Rizzo, anything?
Not for me, progress.
Mr. Cullen?
Yes, Mayor, just a couple items real quick. One, obviously, congratulate Carmella, I don't know if anybody has noticed, but Carmella said to me, and not miss Antonides. Amy was expected to miss the September 5th meeting, but she had a emergent family matter, which grabbed her from being here tonight. So we won't see Amy until probably the middle of September, and very pleased to see Carmella here today. Thank you. Good job, which I certainly could not have done, so thank you very much. I had mentioned at our last meeting that the tax bills were out. They're blue this year. Everybody should have received them. We've extended the grace period, that's what they call it.
Yes.
We've extended the grace period until August 31st. And I know I said it a bunch of other times, but we adopted our municipal budget this year probably earlier than any other year, and the delay was due to the change in the state funding formula. Everybody saw pictures of the governor on the beach and everything else. It was all part of the same problem, and it was at that time during the state budget adoption is when they finalized the change in school funding formula, and that impacted every municipality throughout the state, including South Plainfield. The Board of Education only received, I think it was $2,500 more, but nevertheless, even if we didn't get a penny more, the brakes were put on all of our bills. So for anybody who hasn't looked at the letters and everything that you see on there. Also, just want to mention, Mayor, you had sent a letter out a week or so ago regarding all the work that's taken place by Middlesex Water Company. And at that meeting, in that letter, you had mentioned that the water company would be on Sampton Avenue for roughly a month. And I think they're still working on some of the side streets, but they're really not done yet. I mean, what happens, and Mr. Miller and myself have met with the water company a number of times, from what I understand the process, and I may be omitting a few things, but when the water company comes in, they're putting in the new mains, and then after the new mains are in, they have to test the water and everything else. So it's not like they put the new mains in and now we're going to connect everybody's home. The new mains go in, the new main is on Sampton Avenue, but they're going to go back to Sampton within the next week or so to then connect each one of the individual homes on Sampton. And they're gonna do the same thing on Orchard, they're gonna do the same thing on Market. So if you're on one of those streets that had them, they're back. I mean, you're gonna see them come back, and that's the reason why. I mean, they're replacing the main, and then they're doing the individual service connections. So, what streets that they did and what streets that they didn't do, all of that was part of the new project. Once they're done with the work that's taking place at Sampton, they're gonna move over to the Maple Avenue section. And then when they're done with the Maple Avenue section, they're gonna finalize the work over around the senior center. They're gonna do those roads, Mill and King, and all those streets in there. One last thing that I will just mention is there's also a delay in which some of the roads are gonna be done, because as they put in these mains and they put in these service locations, they want a period of time to go by for this stuff to settle. So, these roads are gonna get done, it's just, at what point in time are they finally out of those areas? And, actually, I didn't have a chance to talk to Gary, but I think even some of the work on Plainfield Avenue, I think is also being affected, because I think they still have to do a connection from Madison, from North Madison that's over there. So this is kind of causing a crimp in a lot of the work, and until they're done, we really can't go in them. So, they're essentially done across the street here. They've been done for a while. They're tying up a few locals on, I think it's Merchants and a few of those streets there. But they've been done for a little while here in front of the municipal building. But all the other areas that are listed, they're not done. They've finished up. They have finished up so far the water main replacement, but they're still doing a lot of service connections. So if you see them back, we're expecting the detour, which was going on Sampton Avenue, that's going to come back. So I just want to make everybody aware of that. There's some people that are here that live off of Sampton Avenue. I just want to make them aware of that. Also want to welcome Heather Barry, who was on tonight's agenda. Heather will be, there's no replacing Mark Ackerman. March has been great, and I think everybody knows that, but March is never retired. She's partially retired, but I just want to thank Marge for all her service, and we are bringing Ms. Heather Barry on to perform that role, and with that progress.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Miller.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. As an update on the Capitol Road job, the contractor's still working over on the Lane Britter Manning project over there. They're working on the concrete. That should be done shortly, and then hopefully we can get in there and mill and pave the roads in the next couple of weeks, get that over with. After that, we'll move on to the next set of roads that we have in the project. But we're looking to get that one done first, and then get over to Belmont and get Belmont done also as soon as we can. There was a meeting I had last week with the county. They're planning a project to replace the culvert on Walnut Street. It's in the design stage right now. That's a rather large culvert that's very old out there. So they have that planned for next year to go out to bid, I believe. And at that point, the road will have to be shut down. But we have some. We should have a detour with side streets over there that it really shouldn't be a problem. The last thing is we're going out to bid for leaf bags now. We have that coming up shortly, and we'll have them in place to distribute towards the end of October with that progress.
Thank you. Anything from our clerk's office?
Nothing, progress.
Sure. Okay. Councilman Poston.
Okay, well, thank you, Mayor. I have a few things tonight. All of them I'm really happy to discuss. First of all, I would like to say thank you very much to the South Plainfield Library Board for their continued kind of enhancement and adoption of Willow Park right behind the library in Borough Hall. And I want to thank them too for just working so well with our Recreation Department. They've moved very quickly. At last council meeting, I proposed putting in a adaptive swing in that area because we don't really have any adaptive swings right now. and they've acted very quickly. So I'm pleased to report that the swing is already on order and should be here soon. So I wanted to thank them again. And I have discussed maybe looking for further locations for more type of this equipment in town. I really feel that socialization and play is all part of that, is so important for developing social skills in all types of children. So I want to make sure we have equipment for them in other places as well. So I plan on moving forward with that. Number 2, there will be wrestling and cheer mats delivered this week to the PAL, along with some new underlayment. So for the next few weeks, as soon as those items come, the room might be closed for a little bit while they're getting everything ready, putting it down, and it will be open though in September, just in time for the season. Thing number 3, lighting for the turf field. Everything should come around the 1st of September, and that should be installed shortly thereafter, so that will also be up and ready to be used in the fall. Today there was some stone dust deliveries to the Southside Dog Park, which is great, so there's progress there. That project is moving along. And the final thing I just had to say was this Saturday, I wanted to thank Acme Markets. They ran a fundraiser for our senior center. I know it was in TAP, but I don't know who's aware that the senior center just lost some of the funding for the breakfast program. The larger chains have decided to give their donations to more national type food banks or state level food banks, and where they were receiving their donations from, they can't give what they don't have. So they reached out to Acme Markets, and this Saturday they ran a very successful fundraiser. Acme donated $764 worth of products to stock up the senior center breakfast program. Tree did a wonderful job, the manager Linda there, and also 2 senior volunteers. I just have to say, Grace McGinnis and Jerry Brown sat there all day long to help with this fundraiser. So I just wanted to thank them. I also did want to thank Councilman Benjavanga for taking action to help making our railroad crossings safer and better for the whole community. So thank you for that. And thank you for Carmela for your work tonight. And that's it.
Thank you, Councilman Benjavanga.
I'll report progress.
Thank you, Councilman Vest.
Progress, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilman Bullock.
Progress, Mayor.
Thank you, Council President White.
I'm not giving in to peer pressure.
I wouldn't expect you to.
Councilwoman Faustini, I know you know the Labor Day parade's coming up, so I want to just mention that. And I don't know if they're still registering people. You'll probably mention it, right, Mrs. Boyle? Okay. And then the other thing was Raymore and Flanagan is going to be opening soon. They have a tentative date. I don't want to mention it because they haven't gotten their final permits and things like that. So, but they're going to be opening soon. You can see the sign up over at the mall, Middlesex Mall. So we're very excited about that. It's going to be one of their outlet stores. So we'll be looking forward to having that open up. And then for Mrs. Grenier, I wanted to just tell you that unfortunately I don't have any additional information regarding the MVC. They haven't inked the deal yet, is what I was told. They're still negotiating a lease for a potential site here in South Plainfield. So as soon as I find something out definitively, I will let you know.
I went by the Kilmer place on Saturday and the line was out the door and out into the parking lot of people waiting to get.
Yeah, they have construction going on over there as well. So
Terrible.
between the construction and I think they've always had capacity problems there as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty hectic over there. So hopefully sooner rather than later I'll have some good news. And with that, progress, Mayor.
Thank you, sir. I just have one. I'd like to make sure nobody had questioned ordinance 2089, but as a much younger councilman, one of the first things that I had done was propose an ordinance banning smoking. Well, actually, it didn't ban smoking in the park, in parks in South Plainfield, but it restricted them within a certain radius of playground equipment. So that's been on the books for quite some time. This, in consultation with our green team, takes it a step further. So an ordinance 2089, which was introduced today, will prohibit smoking in all municipal buildings, inside the buildings, also within a 35-foot radius of the front entrance of municipal buildings, and also a 25-foot radius of any other entrance. And then furthermore, in the parks, it'll ban smoking completely. So within the footprint of the park, no longer just within certain boundaries of equipment. So I think it's long overdue, and something that's on its way out anyway. That's exactly correct. It does help us with our sustainable Jersey effort. At this point, open up for any public comments, anything on your mind. Yes, Ms. Cup.
I just wanted to give you some updates on the library. Our children's department was very busy in the month of July. We had over 1,000 children attend 66 programs in July alone. Our attendance in the children's programs and the adult programs doubled from June to July as well. We've also gotten a lot of compliments about the swings, and I want to thank Councilwoman Faustini about bringing up the swing project for the adaptable swing, and the board was just thrilled to approve it. And we're moving very quickly on it, and it should be here in probably about 2 weeks now.
I hope so,
Yes, and hopefully we can have just a little ceremony about that, and
Sure.
so the public knows. We've also gotten tremendous inquiries about the floor in the women's room. I know it's ridiculous, but Linda told me she gets 4 or 5 inquiries a week about what kind of floor it is, where we got it from,
Really?
and how beautiful it is. So thank you, Lenny, to your crew,
I know what kind of floor it is.
Council, and Besh
Top
for
secret, trade secret.
for supporting the
Lighting up that.
bathroom project.
I mean, obviously, I've never seen the floor.
Well, go ahead. Also, what we did approve is an electronic sign for the front of our building. So we are working with a gentleman from town, but his business is in Kenilworth. So we will be installing that probably, yes, I know, Kamal.
Yeah.
Yes, and the electrician is from town as well that we're working with. We anticipate that around October.
And that's going to be mounted, correct? Permanent sign?
Permanent sign, yep. And I guess that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Hello.
Yes.
I'm Karina Nagy, 214 Chelsea Lane. How are you?
Good.
I'm here. It's going to be our 8-year anniversary of us talking about the train noise coming up September 1st. And I was excited to see on the tap Mr. Benyavenga speak so loudly and passionately about the rails, except that to my dismay, it wasn't about the noise of the trains, but mostly about the undercarriage problem that causes a lot of the vehicles. So I'm not sure what happened with this resolution that was up on the agenda. And I'd like to have a little bit more clarity
I
on
can
that.
respond to that. So at the beginning of the meeting, I announced that, let me just take this back a little bit. About 4 or 5 months ago, I was getting complaints. I don't personally travel over New Brunswick Avenue crossing because I go over Front Street. But I was getting complaints that, oh, it's getting bad, and we really don't have any jurisdiction, as we know, over Conrail. So I brought it up at a meeting about how we were getting complaints. Borough sent letters to Conrail. As in the past, we weren't getting any response. Okay? And so then I started going over the past month and a half, and it was to the point where I had to stop my vehicle on that. And somebody's gonna go over that 35 miles an hour, whatever, and is going to do damage to their car, or God forbid, do damage to something else. And what really sparked me and angered me was the fact that somebody was stopped on the tracks and said that they heard a train coming, and heard the gate, but they're stopped because you have to go over so slowly. And they were getting nervous that what happens if you get stuck or something like that. So I proposed to the council that we pass a resolution about the safety of those crossings to hopefully get some kind of response from Conrail. After an article went out in TAP and all over Facebook, I guess Conrail listened, and they contacted me. And we were playing phone tag for last week. I know I was texting back and forth with your husband Derek, and I was on vacation, but I did finally, they reached, when I finally talked to them, they said that it was their legal department. At first I was like, uh-oh, are they gonna say, you know, that I did something wrong or something? But they said, listen, we wanna sit down with you and try to figure out how we can rectify the safety of the concerns that you have at the rail. So I said, well, I'm on vacation. I have a resolution on for Monday night that is going to be pretty strong towards you. However, if you get me some kind of correspondence or tell me that we'll be able to set up a meeting, I will be able to postpone that. Well, I didn't hear from them until right before the meeting tonight, and they said that they will confirm a meeting with me this week. They will meet with me this week, so I should know tomorrow or whatever. And I said I'll make myself available, and then at that meeting I will bring up your concerns as well. But at least they responded to this.
No, and actually that was one of my, one of the reasons why I'm here, because I feel it's important that finally there is a meeting, regardless of what the meeting is about, and specifically in the lines that we have been having problems for the past 8-9 years,
Yeah.
8-9 years that I've been here talking about it, but perhaps more, longer than that. And if you take this opportunity, and if they're willing to fix that line, and if they can make it in a way, so that way it becomes much more compliant with the quiet zone, I think that that would take us one step further to where we want to be.
So that's going to be, I'm going to be meeting with one of the regional guys and one of the legal team people, so that's going to be part of my conversation with them. And I had talked to Glenn about that as well, you know, about what we're going to present to them. But first and foremost, make sure that those things get fixed so that nobody gets
I
hurt.
understand that, believe me, I
Second
cross
would
through
be,
that all
will
the
be
time.
that, but it's opening a dialogue with them so that we have some kind of line of communication. The fact that now, instead of sending letters to Conrail, I have a direct contact at the legal department and public affairs department that they know that they'll need to respond.
Correct, and I just want to say it shows great testament to the fact that when a council member reaches out and puts stuff in the paper, then things happen. When somebody like me or my neighbors say something, it takes a very long time for Conrail to hear us. So I think your effort has made a difference, perhaps a small one, in terms of finally somebody looking at the rail issue. Again, and I'd like to emphasize this to you, that if you are going to discuss with them fixing that specific street to make it compliant to a quiet zone, it doesn't take any more, because that, as you've experienced, it's a small area.
Well, it's a first step there, so.
No, I understand that, but I just want you to
Yeah, what I'm saying is
understand
that
what our
I'm not
point
just gonna address it for that one, it's gonna be addressed for all.
Correct,
So,
correct.
we're gonna look at New Brunswick as the safety issue, but it is gonna, this whole meeting is gonna address all the crossings.
Yeah, I mean, that.
Because it has to.
Correct, it has to, it affects all of us that live in that area, those specific streets. So I just wanted to once again remind you that I'm here on behalf of all of my neighbors that live up and down that street, that listen to the trains every single time, that their cars are ruined every single time, and that nobody ever listens at Conrail. I know you guys listen because you know me, but nobody, we hit a hard wall every single time, so.
Well, we're in a step in the right direction. And one of the things that's interesting about social media and stuff like that is we do have the ability that once that article was out there, that I was able to share it and stuff like that. And so my roommate from college reached out to me. He lives in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And he calls me and goes, what the heck do you have against the Lehigh Valley line? Because that's where it comes from,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I said, I got a problem with the crossing, because, and I told him the whole thing. So I said, okay. He goes, he works for Bethlehem, the city of Bethlehem. Probably because he's happy to say this, but, you know, it's just maybe somebody like him who might have talked to somebody, finally got the ears of Conrail. So everything helped in this situation, starting from the paper to the online, to Facebook, to you, to us, to everybody.
Correct,
We all
I mean,
collectively
I
believe.
saw the publication of the paper on, August 7th, and here,
Yeah.
7 days later, and there's a resolution, so you know, it just goes to show that how much, when you guys put in effort, how things kind of start moving. So I just hope that you keep all of us that live in that area in mind when you talk to
Yeah,
Concom.
and I told your husband I'll keep him updated. I texted him before, I would call him tomorrow just to let him know what's going on, but obviously, tell him my update.
Yeah.
But I will keep him updated on stuff that happens over there. He offered his assistance and as well as everybody. I
Thank you very
appreciate it.
much.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Mrs. Boyd?
Debbie Boyle, Van Fleet. A few years ago, Superintendent Caparelli of the DPW and I did a fundraiser for the electronic sign for out in front of Borough Hall. We raised thousands of dollars for that. There was an ordinance which encompassed other items, including that sign. Do you have any idea when that sign, there were organizations in town that contributed to that? And that's the common
I
sense.
mean, those funds are still in our trust fund.
Okay, yeah.
One of the issues we're looking at is whether or not we're gonna put that sign in the PAL, is really what we're looking at,
Okay.
versus having them doubled up between us. We couldn't, if you remember, we couldn't do it at that time, because originally we were putting it in front of Borough Hall, and
Yes.
now there's a depression,
Right.
for lack of a better word.
Retention
So,
pond.
Well, it doesn't retain anything, but,
Good.
so that is one of the things that we're looking at. Some of the firms that the library interviewed, we had also met with down at the PAL as well. So this process has been going on now with us as well. So, I mean,
Okay.
there should be some news in the very near future.
All right, good, 'cause that would be a good thing. Then that would be good at the PAL too, because people driving by on Maple Avenue would be able to view the upcoming events. Also, the baby time at the library on Fridays is packed and it's amazing. The little ones, it's educational for them, even though they're young babies. They do sing-alongs and they have playtime, so Miss Mia does a great job with that. We love it, so thank you to the library for doing that. I know that after that is the older children, so it's really good. Also, as a member of the Green Team for the borough, thank you for doing those the resolutions. We met 3 weeks ago, and it's important to continue our application for sustainability. So that was a big part of it. So is Mayor's Wellness and the different programs that we do there. I know that for many of the events, we invite the borough employees to be a part of that. That is documented through press releases inviting the borough employees to attend. So again, thank you for doing those resolutions.
Absolutely. Anyone else? Okay. Seeing none, we are going to close the public portion. We are going into executive session. You are more than welcome to stay and enjoy the amenities. We will be back as soon as possible. We do not anticipate any additional activity for tonight's meeting. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Tonight's executive session did not result in any additional items to tonight's agenda. At this point, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting.
So moved.
We are adjourned. Have a good evening, everyone.